My parents always made it clear that my sister was their favorite, but nothing prepared me for the day when, during a dinner celebrating her pregnancy, my own parents ordered me out of the house as if I were a nuisance. Worse, they told me I would continue paying the bills, even though I was living on the street. When I tried to defend myself, my father attacked me, and my sister laughed. At that moment, I realized that either I fought back or I would be destroyed completely. I walked away with nothing, my heart in pieces, but what no one expected was that I would rise again in ways they never could have imagined. And when justice came knocking on their door, it was too late for regrets. Hello, welcome to this channel. Like and subscribe, enjoy, and turn on notifications. Comment below which city you're watching from. I'd love to hear it, and please leave a heart in your comment. Since I was little, I learned not to expect much from my parents. While my sister was called my little angel or my princess, I was just the other daughter. The one who kept quiet when my older sister wanted to sleep, who cleaned the house while she watched TV, who washed the dishes after Sunday dinner, even without anyone asking, was the best, because they knew what I would do. I grew up in this invisible role, a ghost who contributed, who helped, who did what needed to be done, but who never received recognition. My name was only remembered when there was a bill to be paid, and foolishly, I thought this was normal. At 18, I was already working part-time at a stationery store and giving half my salary to my parents to help with the bills. The house was modest but functional, and I felt somewhat safe there. I had no immediate plans to leave, precisely because I knew there was nowhere else to go. My sister, then 20, spent her days at home, sometimes working for an app, other times just waiting for her boyfriend to pick her up for an outing. No one charged her anything. She was the perfect daughter, even though she didn't contribute anything. That afternoon, she came home with her eyes shining and her hand on her belly. Minutes later, an explosion of joy filled the living room. My parents cried with emotion, hugged her as if witnessing a miracle, and repeated phrases like "our family will grow" and finally, "a grandchild." I stood there in the corner, silent, trying to smile. Part of me wanted to rejoice with her, but another felt something strange, as if a growth was tightening my chest. That night, they organized an impromptu dinner. The table was set with the finest dishes, my mother cooked with care, and even my father opened a bottle of wine. Halfway through the meal, amid laughter and plans for the baby's future, the bombshell came. "Starting tomorrow, you can pack your things and leave this house," my father said, as if warning me of a change in the weather. I gasped. I looked around, expecting someone to say it was a joke, but it wasn't. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I have nowhere to go, and I still help with half the bills." My mother leaned forward, crossed her arms, and said coldly, "We don't care. Our princess needs more space. And by the way, you'll keep helping with the bills, we're your parents, and we're the ones who give you orders." My heart raced. That wasn't just unfair, it was cruel. Before I could open my mouth to react, my father, visibly upset, abruptly stood up and tripped me. I fell to the ground hard, the air knocked from my lungs. He yelled, "Stop complaining, you ungrateful idiot. You were born to serve us." My sister, who had remained silent until then, let out a mocking laugh. "Don't complain, sis, I need more space than you. My boyfriend is moving in with us. He needs support right now." In that moment, I realized there was nothing I could do or say that would change that. I was never part of that family, just a useful piece that was now disposable. I got up without another word, walked to my room, grabbed my things, and left. I didn't cry. Not even when the door slammed behind me. That same night, standing outside, I canceled every payment I made for that house. Electricity, internet, gas, the rent I was costing for. My parents and sister would reap the rewards for every cruel act they committed. What they didn't know was that I was the last wall keeping them from collapsing, and they would. The night I left my home was cold. Not because of the temperature, but because of the emptiness. I wandered aimlessly through streets that seemed larger than they actually were. Every streetlight, every corner seemed darker, as if the world knew what had happened. I carried only a backpack with a few clothes, my documents, and my cell phone, which was almost dead. Without enough money for a hotel and no one to turn to, I went to the city's central square, where I knew there would at least be a bench to sit on and some light. There, in the middle of the night, I hugged my knees and rested my chin on my legs. I felt like crying, but the tears wouldn't come. I was numb, from the humiliation, for the disappointment, for the violence, for the certainty that, inside that house, I was never loved. I slept in pieces, afraid to close my eyes and not wake up. As the sun began to rise, I decided I wouldn't let it destroy me. If I was invisible to them, I didn't need to remain invisible to myself. The next day, I went straight to work. I arrived before the stationery store opened and sat on the sidewalk waiting. When my supervisor arrived, she looked at me strangely, and before she could ask anything, she swallowed her pride and said, "I really need more hours here. Anything you can give me, I'll take." I didn't tell her what had happened, but she could tell I was desperate. That week, I started working double shifts. I swept the floor, organized inventory, and served with a smile even when inside I was exhausted. One morning, when I opened the stationery store's mailbox, I found a flyer for a women's student housing association. It was simple, but it said they accepted young women who worked and studied, with affordable rent. I called immediately. That afternoon, after work, I went to see the place. It was an old house with 4 bedrooms shared between 6 girls. Everything was modest but clean. I told her I wasn't studying yet, but I planned to take the university entrance exam and that I had a job. The woman in charge, a college student named Jessica, looked me up and down and said, "If you pay on time, you don't need anything else." That night, I returned to the square, but I slept with a new address in mind and a vague hope in my chest. With my first paycheck after the breakup, I paid the rent for the apartment and bought a used single mattress. My clothes were still in my backpack and my personal belongings were few, but I felt more in control there, in that small shared room, than I ever had in the house where I grew up. Freedom tasted like effort, but it was sweet. Meanwhile, across town, my parents began to notice something had changed. The first month, the rent wasn't paid. After all, it was in my name. The electricity and internet bills were also suspended. The messages started arriving, saying you forgot to pay the bills. How irresponsible of you. Your sister is pregnant, and you want her to live in the dark. I read them all, but I didn't respond to any of them. The final straw was when my mother told me, "You still have obligations to us, don't think you can abandon us." In the Republic, I started to develop a routine. I took extra shifts at the stationery store, and on Sunday nights, I studied for the entrance exam with the other girls. They were kind to me. No one there knew my story, but they had all experienced rejection and new beginnings. Pain united us, but it didn't define us. We shared instant noodles and donuts. 2 weeks later, my sister showed up at the stationery store. She still had a small belly and the same haughty look as always. I waited for her to say something, but what came was, "You're so selfish. Because of you, we don't have internet and we were almost evicted." I took a deep breath. My blood boiled, but I stood my ground. "You're blaming me for something you caused. I was thrown out of the house. I was assaulted, and yet you think I should keep paying for everything." She crossed her arms impatiently. "You've always been dramatic. It wasn't that hard to keep helping. My parents are cursing you." I let out a short, bitter laugh. Maybe they need to start living with their own choices. I'm doing that. She didn't say anything else and walked away in a huff. But as she left one last sentence hanging in the air. "You'll still come back on your knees. No one cares about you." Maybe she was right. Maybe no one really cared. But for the first time in my life, that didn't matter. Because, at that moment, the person who needed to care most was me. Time passed faster than I expected. Within 2 months, I was able to pay my rent comfortably, even if it meant giving up all luxuries. I still had no furniture, still sleeping on a mattress on the floor, but little by little I acquired basic items: a fan, a second-hand lamp, a warmer blanket. It wasn't ideal, but everything there was mine. Earned with effort, honestly. Real, with the Republic's routine and the girls' help, I applied to a public university. I chose administration, not only because I liked organization, but because I knew this course could open doors for me. I studied during breaks at work, in the wee hours of the morning, in the rare moments when fatigue allowed me to breathe. I began to feel proud of myself for the first time, and with that pride came a different kind of pain, the realization that my parents never cared about who I was, only what I did for them. Meanwhile, their situation began to unravel. I learned from a neighbor who worked with one of the girls at the school that my mother's name had been protested for non-payment. The rent was 2 months late, and since the contract was still linked to my CPF, I was contacted directly by the real estate agency. I explained the situation, and with the legal help of one of my colleagues at the university, I filed a request to disassociate my name. The person responsible for the contract understood and followed the process. For the first time, I was cleaning up the trail my own family had left behind. But it was in the third week of April that the masks really started to come off. My mother called me in the middle of the afternoon. I declined the call. Soon after, a flood of messages arrived, saying she was desperate, that the house had no power, that my sister could no longer charge her phone, and that her boyfriend had left due to stress. I didn't respond. It hurt me to see that her concern wasn't for me, but for her favorite daughter's discomfort. Even my boyfriend's absence seemed more important than the fact that I'd been violently kicked out. 2 days later, I was surprised at work. My parents came over. My manager called me to the back of the store, nervous, and whispered, "There's a couple looking for you at the door. They say they're your parents. They're upset." I felt a chill in my stomach. I took a deep breath and walked to the entrance. They were there, with faces very different from the ones I'd seen at dinner that cruel night. My mother had dark circles under her eyes and disheveled hair. My father, though still arrogant, seemed more dejected. "We need to talk," he said. I crossed my arms. "This isn't the place. Can you stop being such an ungrateful person for just a second?" he growled. "We're asking for help. Help or obedience?" I asked. My mother came closer and tried to touch my arm, but I recoiled. "Your sister is suffering, my daughter. She's depressed. Her boyfriend broke up with her, the house is a mess, and you turned your back on us." I swallowed the tears that kept coming up. "You threw me out into the street. Literally. And now you come to charge me for something you yourselves created." My father raised his voice. "You have an obligation to your family. We created you. You used me, I corrected you. Creating is different. Raising involves love, it involves respect, and you gave me neither." Before they could say anything else, my manager came to the door and firmly said, "If you don't leave now, I'm calling the police." They left without another word. But they left there the confirmation of what I already knew. The pride they'd used so hard to humiliate me now blinded them to the abyss they were sinking into. In the days that followed, I learned indirectly that my sister's pregnancy had become more difficult. The bills were piling up. The house was threatened with repossession by the real estate agent. And to make matters worse, my father lost his weekend mechanic job due to his aggressive behavior toward customers. The image of the perfect family began to crumble before the world. While they were crumbling, I was beginning to rebuild. I was called for an interview at a new stationery store, larger and with better pay. I brought my simple but honest resume. I spoke about my experience, my dedication, and my desire to grow. I left with the job, I doubled my salary. And the following month, I got my own room in the same apartment. I didn't have to share anymore. It was small but whole, and it was my refuge. Deep down, I knew there was still much to come. I still cried silently some nights. I still felt anger, I still had open wounds. But at the same time, a new strength was being born. A silent certainty, I had survived abandonment. And now, I would grow up outside. 3 months had passed since the day I left home without looking back. I still remembered every word spoken that night as if it were etched into my skin. But little by little, the pain was giving way to determination. I no longer saw myself as the rejected daughter. I was the woman who had survived. I had a room of my own, a more dignified job, and my studies were progressing, albeit with sacrifice. I felt like I was rebuilding something I'd never had, a life under my own control. It was a Saturday morning when I decided to go to the market to buy some items for the week. I was distracted with headphones on when I stopped at the cereal section. That's when I heard, even over the music playing, a voice I'd recognize anywhere, my father's. Turning around, I found myself face to face with him and my mother. They stood there, pushing a nearly empty cart. Their faces held the same rigidity as ever, but something about them had changed. Their gaze wasn't just hard. It was threatening. "We finally found you," he said, lowering his tone but with venom in his voice. I tried to move away, but they followed me with the cart. "You really think you're going to get rid of us?" my mother said in a cold whisper. "You still owe this family. Your sister lost the baby. She's devastated, and this is all your fault." My heart raced. I tried to ignore it, grab what I needed and leave. But my father blocked my path with his body. "If you don't help again, you ungrateful girl, something worse will happen. Life will demand your payment, and if it doesn't, we will." At that moment, my blood ran cold. This was no longer a simple demand. It was a clear threat. My eyes began to sting, but I refused to cry in front of them. I was about to scream for help when a woman, who had been grabbing items from the shelf next to me, approached. "Is everything okay here?" she asked firmly, staring at my parents. My father tried to hide it. "It's just a family matter." From what I hear, it sounds more like a threat than a family matter. She turned to me. "Are you feeling safe, young lady?" I shook my head. The woman then took a Brazilian Bar Association card from her purse. "I'm a lawyer. And if this happens again, you both will be held criminally responsible. In fact, you can start worrying now, because I heard the threat myself and can testify." My parents turned pale. They tried to mumble something, but then they hurried out of the aisle, pushing the nearly empty cart like someone fleeing a fire. The woman turned to me and lightly touched my shoulder. "My name is Clarissa. If you really want to assert your rights, I can help you." I wrote down her phone number with trembling hands, too grateful to say anything at that moment. The next day, we met at her office. I explained everything, from the expulsion to the physical assault, the financial pressure, and the recent threat. Clarissa listened silently, but her eyes were steady. When I finished, she took a deep breath. "We'll file a request for a protective order. What's more, you have legal grounds to file a lawsuit for psychological abuse, physical assault, and moral damages. They used your addiction to exploit you, and this needs to be reported." It was like a window had opened. For the first time, someone told me that what I'd experienced wasn't normal or a drama. It was a crime. With her help, I filed for a protective order. Within a few days, a hearing was scheduled. My parents were legally ordered to stay within a 500-meter radius of me. Furthermore, the lawsuit for physical assault and moral damages was formally filed, including my sister as an emotional accomplice and direct dependent on the resources I previously provided. The day I received the order, I cried alone in my room. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. It was as if, for the first time, justice was truly on my side. Even though the road was long, something inside me aligned. I wasn't guilty. I was the survivor. The girls from the Republic celebrated with me. We had a simple dinner of rice, beans, farofa, and soda, but the table was full of supportive voices. And that was worth more than any forced party I'd experienced in my old house. Shortly thereafter, Clarissa advised me to seek free psychological counseling through the public system and also through law school programs. I began attending sessions, and there, through tears, I began to understand how everything I'd experienced had affected me and how I could begin to heal. While my parents slandered me to acquaintances and neighbors, calling me rebellious, ungrateful, and cruel, I grew stronger in silence. With each victory, each night I slept peacefully, each morning I woke without fear, a new part of me was born. Stronger. More aware, more in control of my own story. The lawsuit we filed against my parents and sister dragged on for months. With each hearing, with each new stage, I felt like I was stirring up old wounds, but also cleaning them. Clarissa's presence by my side gave me strength, and the support of the girls at the Republic, even if silent, kept me from giving up. I wanted justice, but above all, I wanted them to know they could no longer destroy me with impunity. During the depositions, I recalled every detail of the assault, the expulsion, and the blackmail that followed. Clarissa was thorough in presenting proof of the monthly bank transfers I made to my parents, as well as the contracts in my name, including the electricity, rent, and gas bills. The most powerful part, however, was the account of the lawyer who witnessed the threat at the supermarket. Her speech was clear, firm, and undermined any argument my family might have used to victimize themselves. My sister didn't even attend the hearing. They said she was in crisis, that she couldn't get out of bed. The judge, impassive, proceeded with the case anyway. And then, one ordinary day, as I was returning from work, I received a call from Clarissa and the verdict was handed down. My heart nearly leaped into my throat. She arranged to meet me at the office the next day, and when I arrived, she greeted me with a tight smile. "You win." They lost on all counts. The judge acknowledged the psychological abuse, forced financial dependence, and physical assault. And the ruling was clear. My parents and sister would have to pay me $57,000 in compensation for moral and material damages. Furthermore, the protective order was maintained for another 6 months, with the possibility of extension. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to absorb this. The amount, while not erasing the pain, represented more than money. It was recognition that what they did to me was wrong. It was the state saying, "You were hurt, and you deserve reparations." The news fell like a bombshell on my parents' house. I learned from a neighbor that my mother burst into tears when she learned they couldn't appeal the decision. My father, furious, tried to hide his despair, but the reality was clear. They couldn't afford to pay everything at once. They were forced to sell the family car, an old but still valuable sedan. The vehicle they used to display a stability that never existed was now the first sacrifice. With the proceeds from the sale, they were able to cover part of the compensation. The remainder came from the termination of the lease on the house where they lived. They had to move to a smaller house in a more remote neighborhood. A simple house with mold on the walls and no garage. It was the first time they felt the weight of their own choices. Even so, they didn't admit guilt. They told their neighbors they had been deceived by their ungrateful daughter who had made up lies. But truth spreads faster than anger. When the court decision became public, many of those who knew them from afar began to see their masks slipping. The false image of an exemplary family began to crumble. With the compensation money, I paid off some personal debts and saved the rest. I didn't go out and spend it. For me, it represented rebuilding, not revenge. I invested in a new laptop, better suited for my studies, and paid for an online preparatory course with weekend tutoring. I wanted to be ready for the upcoming college entrance exam. At the same time, my emotional health was also beginning to blossom. Sessions with the psychologist from the university's free program helped me understand that what I experienced was not normal. It wasn't my fault. I learned to recognize patterns of abuse, and more importantly, I learned to forgive myself for having endured so much for so long. One day, on my way home from school, I passed a square near the house where my parents now lived. From afar, I saw my mother sitting alone on a bench. She was thin, haggard, her hair tied up haphazardly. I watched her for a few seconds. Instead of anger, I felt a strange emptiness. There was no joy in her fall, no pleasure in seeing her like that. Just a realization. She was now reaping exactly what she had sown. I didn't come any closer, I didn't say anything, I just went on my way. Later, I received a message from an unknown number. It was my sister. Short, direct, and full of venom. Congratulations, you destroyed our family, I hope you're happy. I deleted it without replying. Because, in truth, I wasn't the one who destroyed anything. I just stopped carrying on my back the rubble of a house they themselves decided to demolish. And for the first time, I felt light. The following semester arrived with new winds. The Republic, which had once been my temporary shelter, no longer held my dreams. I wanted more. I wanted a place of my own, without partitions, without hearing footsteps in the hallway or sharing a bathroom with 3 other people. I wanted my own door, my own key. My freedom. With the remaining severance pay saved, the promotion at the stationery store, and my credit cleared, I decided it was time to take an even bigger step. Financing my first apartment. I looked for small options within my means. I went to real estate fairs, talked to brokers, calculated installments, fees, and interest with the precision of someone who knew every penny. Then I found it. A modest 58 square meter apartment in a simple but well-located building. A kitchen integrated into the living room, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small balcony overlooking a park. When the financing was approved and I signed the contract, I cried alone in the empty property. It was the first time my name on a document signified freedom, not debt due to imposed obligation. Soon after signing, the university entrance exam arrived. Months of studying, scribbled notebooks, late-night notes, doubts, anxiety. Clarissa, my lawyer and now friend, accompanied me throughout the process. "You'll enter this university like someone entering a courtroom to seek justice," she said. And she was right. I was accepted second in my class to a public university for law school. When I saw my name on the list, my hands trembled. I fell to my knees on the floor of my new, still unfurnished apartment and cried like I hadn't cried in a long time. It was victory. It was a fresh start. It was confirmation that no one could stop me, not even those who tried to destroy me from within. With the first installment of the loan already paid off, I was able to buy a used refrigerator, a new mattress, and a desk for studying. Each item that entered represented more than possessions. It was a conquest. News of my approval and the apartment financing reached my parents' old house faster than I imagined. I learned from mutual acquaintances that my mother was unable to leave the house for days. My wounded pride was as great as my disbelief. She managed all this without us, I asked repeatedly. My father, unable to accept it, said it was luck or the help of people who want to show off. My sister, however, immersed in frustration and resentment, commented that the ungrateful woman now felt alone because she passed the entrance exam. But even if they didn't say it out loud, the truth was right there. The daughter they had humiliated, expelled, and threatened was now a college student, had a stable job, and a mortgage on her own apartment. Meanwhile, they remained cramped in a rented house, without a car, and with their reputations eroded by their own arrogance. As much as their pride screamed within them, for the first time they began to see who I truly was. That daughter who had never been held, who had always been used for financial and emotional support, was strong. And not just strong, I was resilient. They never imagined I'd rise again. They thought I'd crawl back, crying for forgiveness. But what they found was silence, and a path for them to follow. One afternoon, leaving the university, I found my mother sitting on a bench near the gate. She was dressed simply, holding a bag in her lap and looking at me with a mixture of longing and embarrassment. "Are you okay?" she asked, almost whispering. "Better than ever," I replied, without irony. Only truthfully. She tried to hold my gaze for a few more seconds, as if she wanted to say something her mouth couldn't. But in the end, she just nodded and stood up. There was no hug, no apology. Just a gesture of recognition, even without admitting it, of the strength they once disdained. A few days later, I received a message from my sister. "You won right, but know that you destroyed our family to do so. I deleted it without replying. I wasn't the one who destroyed anything. They were the ones who planted dynamite in every foundation they pretended to call home. I only got out before being buried with them. Today, my routine is divided between my internship at Clarissa's office, college classes, and homeschooling. The apartment is still far from complete, but every item, every installment, every achievement is my hard work. And no one can take that away from me. They kicked me out thinking I'd go broke. But what they never knew was that I was just putting down roots. If this story touched your heart as much as it did ours, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel continue to bring you moving stories like this. Subscribe so you don't miss future videos, and share this with someone who needs to hear this message of strength, resilience, and justice. And now, let me know in the comments. Would you have done the same as this daughter? Would you have had the courage to break away from everything and rebuild your life away from those who hurt you? I'd love to hear your opinion. And don't forget to tell me which city you're watching this video from. I read every comment and will leave a special heart for those who tell me where they're following our story from. Thank you so much for being here. See you in the next video.